Well, good afternoon, everybody. Wonderful to see you all. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us for this very special launch of Chief Executive Women's Respect is Everyone's Business kit. Timing is always fortuitous, and we are so delighted to have the quality of panel we have joining us today. I will introduce them shortly, but of course I would like to start by acknowledging that I'm joining you from the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation here in Sydney, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. I know we've got people joining from all over the country on lands that are the country of traditional owners, and I extend that acknowledgement to all lands and to all First Nations people who are joining us on the call today. It's wonderful to have you here. I'm delighted to be joined not just by our panellists, but also with Susan Metcalfe, our Chief Executive, and the team from CEW. So what are we here to do today? I'm just going to give you a quick run through as to what Respect is Everyone's Business is all about. I think most of you do know this. We've had a very special sneak preview at our AGM, but today is our official public launch. And this is really a call to action for you to all use your representation and influence in this campaign to eradicate sexual harassment in the workplace. We're asking you all to lead that conversation wherever you may find yourself, whether that's on boards, in executive teams, or even in associations around the place where you have some influence. We need to prioritise this issue because, as we know, and we were going to hear from our panellists and particularly from the Sex Discrimination Commissioner, respect is everyone's business. CEW has developed resources for you to access through a dedicated Chief Executive Women microsite to help kickstart that conversation, to navigate potential resistance, instigate appropriate action, model wording, and to report on progress. And I'm really delighted to say this is an example where CEW members just took the idea and ran with this. This has been led by Catherine Brenner and Cathy McDermott, longtime members of CEW, supported by the CEW working group that worked very hard on this. I know many of you are on this call, supported by Bobby Marlab and her incredible team at Marlab to create a microsite, which I hope you will all have a great play around in. But Catherine, particularly, your leadership on this and taking the matter really from the time that Kate Jenkins reported from her first report about respect at work and creating a set of tools that helps us navigate this in the real world and takes the recommendations to what we can do as leaders has been remarkable. So thank you, Catherine and Cathy and the entire team for all your wonderful work. So today we are joined by remarkable speakers. What I'm going to do in the interest of time is I'm going to introduce each of our speakers very briefly before I turn to the conversation that will start. So you'll hear me introduce each of our speakers before hearing from them directly. So I can't believe she's here. I can't believe she's given us this time in the day, but we are joined by Kate Jenkins. And it might be a round of applause for Kate is required, or some show of what Kate's working on at the moment. I think, Kate, I hope you can see all that gratitude that's coming your way. Kate is, of course, Australia's Sex Discrimination Commissioner. She's a member of the Human Rights Commission and a CEW member, of course. I won't tell you all about her purpose because her purpose is so well telegraphed in the work that she does. And we saw that in the extraordinary report of Respect at Work, the National Inquiry into Sexual Harassment in Australian Workplaces. That report landed in 2020 with 55 recommendations that would aim to see cultural reform right across Australian workplaces. And of course, she had done an enormous amount of work of reform already in the Australian Defence Force, the Australian Police Force, Federal Police, as well as her current work set the standard, which was launched yesterday and commented on by many since its arrival into the hands of the Prime Minister. And that is, of course, the independent review of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Workplaces. Kate is also an ambassador for the FIFA 2023 Women's World Cup. And prior to joining the Commission, she was the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commissioner. She's had 20 years as the lead equal opportunity partner with Herbert Smith Freehills and many years serving on boards of Berry Street, Victoria, Hyder Museum of Modern Art, and of course the Carlton Football Club, where we have a shared passion for Aussie rules. So we're delighted that Kate is joining us, and we'll kick off our conversation in a moment. We're also really delighted that Debra Hazelton joins us today. Debra is chair of AMP Limited and a non-executive director on the boards of Persol Asia Pacific, the Treasury Corporation of Victoria, and vice president of the Australia-Japan Business Corporation Committee. She has an extraordinary career in corporate banking with a particular focus on Australia and Japan. She was the first non-Japanese senior executive in a head office global role for a Japanese mega bank, that was Mizuho Financial Group, and the first non-Japanese to be CEO of a Japanese bank in Australia, Mizuho Bank. First Australian woman to be CEO of an Australian bank in Japan. She is a trailblazer, and she took on the role at AMP, and she's going to be sharing with us the story of AMP today. Thank you, Debra, for joining us. Steve McCann, it's wonderful to have Steve on board today, and he had to step out of a Crown Resorts board meeting today where he has started in his role as chief executive. He joined Crown Resorts as CEO and managing director only in June this year, and was appointed CEO and director of Crown Melbourne Limited just in August. Crown Resorts is one of Australia's largest entertainment groups and owns and operates two of our leading integrated resorts, Crown Melbourne and Crown Perth, as well as Sydney's latest premium resort and dining precinct at Crown Sydney, of course, at Barangaroo. He knows a lot about Barangaroo because he's a business leader with over 25 years of executive experience, and most recently Group CEO and Managing Director of Lend-Lease, where he led the firm from 2008 to 2021. And he's had a very distinguished career across Lend-Lease. And while he was there, he was a strong advocate at the Property Council of Australia Champions of Change Coalition. He also presented at the UN Women's Forum on the topic of family and domestic violence in New York in 2019. And his involvement with the Champions of Change continues as part of the national group, where he plays a key role in driving positive change at Crown. So we're really pleased to have you join us, Stephen. Thank you for jumping out of the Crown board meeting to join us today. I know you are all busy. And Marina Go is our fourth panellist for today and would be well known to all of you. Marina's chair of Adore Beauty and Netball Australia, and a non-executive director on the boards of a number of companies, Energy Australia, 7-Eleven, Autosports Group and Booktopia. I'm delighted to say she's been recently appointed to the board of Transurban. She's a member of UNSW's Business Advisory Council and the ANU Centre for Asian Australian Leadership. She's author of many books, but particularly Breakthrough, 20 Successful Strategies for Female Leaders. Boss Magazine named Marina as one of the 20 true leaders of 2016, and she has over 30 years of leadership experience in the media industry. She started life as a journalist, but she has taken that into the heights, dizzy heights of boards right around this country. I won't talk about much more Marina, just suffice to say she also is a former chair of West Tigers NRL Club, a role that she pioneered, the Super Netball Commission, the Walkley Foundation and Ovarian Cancer Australia, and was the inaugural chair of the UTS Centre for Media Transition Advisory Board. She does a lot of work for CEW and AICD and has been actively progressing outcomes for women, particularly culturally diverse women in her working life, and as a volunteer over 3 decades. So we are so well served today with a remarkable panel. So what I'm going to do now is put you in the hands of our panel to start with, and I'm going to start with Kate Jenkins. Kate, as I said, thank you for joining us. We're going to ask each of our panellists to speak for about 5 minutes. I'll ask a question to then take us to the next contribution from a panellist, and our panellists have chosen a topic to speak to you about today to get things underway. So Kate, welcome. Thank you so much for everything you're doing and to still find a spot for us today to talk about the important work that you have been doing. Kate Jenkins.
Thank you very much, Sam, and hello to everyone. I'm speaking to you from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Of course, I would come to this. This is an initiative that is just a dream for someone who did a piece of work that really kind of tried to direct or give guidance on what a new approach to sexual harassment would be. And some of you will know, I think it's a sign of the times that 2 copies of my Respect at Work report, which is pretty hefty, are holding up this laptop now. But this is a small copy that I could find to do a show and tell. And or pretty much every document I'm going to reference will be in the resources section of the fabulous new website. So there's a quick shout out that we will continue to give for what a great new resource that Catherine Brennan has led in providing to this audience. So I just thought I'd flag a couple of things in Respect at Work, a piece of work that I have done with or for the Australian Council of Superannuation Investors, and then just a couple of other comments about industry risks of sexual harassment. So in Respect at Work, we did really highlight in the 7 domains of attention that leadership is and is always the number one priority. And when we talk about leadership, although everyone always says everyone has a leadership role, we were really mindful of the role of boards, executive, and then the line leaders. So if I go kind of focus then down towards particularly the boards and the executives, last year, some of you will recall there was a media reporting about the experiences at AMP. And at the time, you also will recall that the Australian Council of Superannuation Investors became vocal on that, questioning whether the organisation was leading the way or, asking what was going on in terms of their investment. Workers also raised their voice. But after that experience, ACSI came to the Human Rights Commission and said, look, we want to be asking all of the organisations we invest in what they're doing to prevent sexual harassment, but we're concerned that we want to ask the right questions, and we want our questions to be the questions that direct organisations towards fixing their problems. So we produced a report that involved looking at the ASX 200, a survey and interviews about what was going on in boards, what was collected, reported and used. And the results were interesting. Only 19% of the respondents said the boards regarded themselves as primarily responsible and accountable for sexual harassment. Only 43% had sexual harassment as a regular board agenda item, and only 19% of them required their board leaders to undergo training on good governance about sexual harassment. So in practice, what we heard in the 16 consultation meetings were that women on boards made a massive difference on this topic. And we can go into this, but it was just intelligent questions asked at a board level, opened opportunities for organisations to start doing more innovative things. So actually, Team's company secretary said they particularly welcomed the board asking better questions. In particular, and Sam, you don't know this, but I had a policy advisor working with me who said, should one of the recommendations be that Sam Mostyn be on every board? Because it wasn't a coincidence that you were given as an example more than once. So that was pretty funny because this was not a corporate policy advisor. I had no idea who this person was. But the resources that are provided to you are exactly to fill that gap, to make sure that boards are having the right conversations and the expertise is right. I've realised 5 minutes super short, so I'll just say one more thing to reference because I'll circle back to AMP. So I have been in really great conversations with AMP as they've gone through the journey post that experience. The reason they reached out to me, aside from some fabulous connections through CEW, was that they read a media interview that I did. I was interviewed by, and I've got it up on my screen, I can't even tell you, it's probably The Age or The Fin. And the question that I was asked was, isn't AMP a terrible organisation? And my answer was that I was not surprised by the damning testimony, aired in Parliament. And I said, every report I read doesn't surprise me, Ms. Jenkins said. I don't for a minute think this is something that exists at just AMP. I know for a fact it doesn't. We've just had it exposed in one organisation. And that, I guess, is the conversation. Everyone's holding their breath that they're not the one that ends up in the media. That if that's what you're focused on as a board, then you're focused on the wrong thing. Your focus should be on stopping sexual harassment and responding better when it happens. And then the benefits will flow to your organisation. So Sam, thanks. Those are my opening comments.
Thanks, Kate, and thanks for your kind words. I would say that on this call, we've got some of the most exceptional women directors imaginable who are having a huge impact on those boards too. And it has meant that we've seen a big change in the way those questions just get asked, because I think we all play that role often of just talking to.
Absolutely. We heard that.
Yeah. If I had one question for you, just I guess, in light of all of that, the AICD work, the Respect at Work, and now your most recent report on setting the standard, do you have confidence that we've sort of got to a point? We certainly at CW welcomed all of your first reports, the 55 in Respect at Work. We've accepted all your recommendations from yesterday, and we love the work you did with AICD. So do you have a sense that we're making good progress? And are you confident? You feel that confidence in the discussions you're having delivered all this extraordinary work?
Yes, I have incredible confidence in what is happening right now. It's sad that we had to reach a turning point and have such terrible disclosures, but I know and Debra mightn't be in love with the fact, but when AMP experienced that situation last year, I know boards then had a conversation, what would we do? I know when Brittany Higgins made her disclosures, I know for a fact, boards said they asked exactly that question. If that happened in our organisation, what would we do? I think we are at a turning point from a government point of view. Most of the Respect at Work recommendations are being actioned right now. And in terms of the new report, I have every reason to believe that across the Parliament taking those recommendations really seriously.
Thank you, Kate. And I've said this on many panels. If you have not read even just the introduction to both of these reports that Kate's written, both Respect at Work and Set the Standard, I really would encourage you to sit down and take the time. The way you've introduced both of these reports tells a story that we've just got to engage with on a personal level. They're not just numbers and statistics, they are the lived experience of so many, and the prevalence across Australian workplaces was the most stunning thing when you delivered Respect at Work. And the fact that it's in the Parliament as well, as you've been saying today, it's a very bad place for that to happen, but we have a problem across the country. So I would really encourage everyone to read those reports, and particularly the introductions that give you that insight. And if you're doing that, and particularly on this call, as we get into the case studies and talk more about this, please do take good care of yourselves. If any of you feel that this is a difficult conversation, or that you need to take a breath or take a moment, either leave the call or afterwards take a few moments, or if you need further help, 1800-RESPECT is a really great resource. So we're covering really very difficult territory here that we don't often discuss in this way, which is the very reason why the Respect is Everyone's Business toolkit is so important. So with that, I'd love to bring Debra Hazelton in. Debra, you've had the introduction from Kate around AMP. You're being very, very courageous with us and very generous by telling the AMP story. The AMP case study is up live on the microsite now, and it takes a lot of guts for the chair of a company that's been through the things you've been through to do that. So why don't you start us off with some reflections about AMP and just what you've been doing, and it's been an extraordinary journey since you've taken over as chair.
Thank you very much, Sam and Kate, for your generous comments. I'd like to start by acknowledging and paying my respects to the First Nations, the first Australians, and acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the elders, and both past and present, the elders of recent arrivals, and I also acknowledge all First Nations people. The phrase "respect is everyone's business" resonates really strongly for me. A respectful culture is inclusive, it embraces diversity, it creates safer workplaces, free from all harassment, discrimination and bullying. I truly believe that misconduct can be traced back to lack of respect. Throughout my career, I've been very active in supporting women and inclusion and diversity, whether it be in Australian banking, as a business leader in Japan, or driving global corporate transformation, culture transformation from New York to London, from Asia to India. However, today, as Sam said, I'd like to call upon my recent experience as chair of AMP. It's a role I took on as a direct result of accusations that AMP supported a corporate culture that looked past misconduct, specifically sexual harassment. No one needs reminding that in the middle of 2020, AMP became Australia's high-profile corporate Me Too story. Understandably, as a result, the company faced criticism from employees, investors, shareholders, and the broader community. We needed to take accountability and we needed to act. I also agree that we're now at a point in history where all stakeholder expectations have changed. It's very significant. It's expected that leaders at such a time as what happened to AMP will unite to say very clearly, this type of behaviour is never okay. There are no special circumstances. There are no particular contexts or backstories that we can wrap this up in and put it away. Leaders have to own the problem as a behavioural problem across the whole institution. It can't be managed as an isolated incident, or I don't think even within an institution, without leaning in and working with others in the industry. So clear communication and meaningful action by the board, CEO and executive in genuine partnership is required at times like that. At that time at AMP, we were facing into a huge trust deficit. We felt that the only way we could drive change and rebuild that trust was to start from a point of commitment and humility, recognising that it's a long journey. The first thing we did as a board was to commission a comprehensive workplace culture and conduct review by global inclusion experts. And the review served as both an audit and a risk assessment of the current status, and it was considered in depth by the board. We had a board culture working group and also the executive team. And then the management team used the findings to build a proactive and systematic framework for the prevention and response to misconduct. That management action plan consists of 69 initiatives, and some of them are quite hefty. Most of them are fairly hefty, and they're tracked monthly, and the progress is reported and discussed at board. To be effective in leading change, cultural change, each board director must be able to and ready to dissect root causes and look at barriers to progress. I've been asked if it's easier for women directors to lean into these issues. I don't know that that's the case. I don't think it's the case. I'll be interested to see what Steve says. Because we all know men, there are many men who feel just as strongly and just as much commitment. However, I do think that women have a particular insight into these issues, of course, often sadly based on our own experiences. And I think that helps with the cut through when you're talking about these things. But it's also necessary to have a critical mass of both men and women. And that usually means 3 or more. Personally, I've very often been the only woman in the room, and more often than not, from an intersectional perspective, the only non-Japanese in a room of Japanese male decision makers. It's really difficult for a sole voice or even a couple of voices to make real impact when the topic is difficult. Since I became chair late last year, Kate McKenzie has joined Andrea Slattery and myself on the AMP board. And of course, from August this year, we've got a female CEO in Alexis George. So that means that we are now 50-50 male and female on our board, which is in line with our gender targets for 40-40-20 across the business. Before finishing, I'd like to speak a bit more broadly. At the time we took up the challenge at AMP, we recognised that we could use our situation to help the broader industry reduce harassment by sharing our action plan and our learnings. It was obvious to me that this was a systemic issue, not specific to AMP. I thought this based on my earlier days when I was working in a dealing room at a large Australian bank, but it was substantiated by the analysis undertaken as part of our workplace conduct review and culture review. And they found that compared to the Australian financial sector benchmarks, AMP in fact represented lower incidence than the sector overall. And that in no way diminishes the commitment, but it fortifies the resolve to work with the industry and to work together with other Australian corporates. I really strongly believe that harassment will not be eliminated if we continue to work in silos. As leaders, I think we all have to forcibly pull ourselves out of the specifics and share our learnings and talk openly about them. We fully recognise that there's always more work to do, but we're fully committed at AMP to building a culture of the values, a purpose-driven culture based on performance and very accountable. But at the same time, we are ready and able, I think, to contribute to a broader culture, corporate culture that is unquestionably safe and respectful. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Debra, and thank you for your commitment to the material you've shared for the microsite and the commitment AMP has made to this. It's been a very special part of the build. I know Catherine and the team were so delighted at the extent to which AMP has really worked to support the whole program. And thank you for sharing that insight about your experience as a non-Japanese, non-man in the environments you're in as the one non-Japanese woman, because it seems to draw across so clearly that when you're different and you're just the only person, we can draw that across every instance when we have been that person, and the difference can be in any form. So thank you for making that reference. It's really powerful. Just a quick question to you. What's been the reaction, a response? Has there been, just briefly, internally or externally, have you seen great support or interest in what it is you've been doing at AMP? Look,
it takes time to rebuild the trust, I think, internally. But we really are seeing some really good results. And it's one of the reasons I wanted to come out now that we've seen that the action plan is very strong, but we're also seeing that's effective. So it's touching a lot of people, 69 initiatives, as you can imagine. We've completed, I think, 46. I think there's 14 will be finished by the end of December and then another 9 early next year. So it's touching everyone in AMP. And that means our clients are seeing it and other people who react with our people at AMP. I think we're certainly, in terms of measurement, by the way, the case study, if people go to it, will see that it's been phrased around Kate's Respect at Work report based on the 7 domains. So, it's quite clear that there's an impact on people, but we are measuring the impact, which is incredibly important, obviously. We need to not only measure it, but we need to be continually refining it so that what we're doing is effective. But things like staff engagement have improved. The number of workplace conduct issues have gone down. These are trends. These are quite noticeable trends. And also we've introduced something called the Inclusion Index, which is very exciting. And we're seeing a lot of engagement and excitement internally to be involved in that. So yeah, it is having the impact we wanted, I think, Sam.
Thank you, Debra, and congratulations on your leadership as chair. Congratulations on gender balance on your board, and of course the appointment of Alexis George, who will soon arrive. You know, they're all very significant steps in addition to this profound piece of work, and good to see that some of those indicators are going in the right direction. So
yes.
Thank you for today.
Thank you.
Steve, I'll come to you now. You're the only man on our panel, and I think I've said this to you on many occasions when you've been the man in the room with all of us, that welcome to our world sometimes when we've been the only women in on boards and executive teams, and I know you always take that in the spirit in which it's offered. And you've just done so much work as a leader to step into this, but you have a perspective as a man who leads, and the work you've done on Champions of Change, and you've now got your brand new job. So over to you for your opening remarks.
Thanks, Sam, and thanks for having me on the panel. As you mentioned earlier, when I was at Lend-Lease, I was part of the Champions of Change then. I think I joined that in 2015, and Lend-Lease was an employer of choice for gender equality in Wajir, so there were a lot of people there that were very passionate. And it's fair to say I learned a lot at Lend-Lease. I learned a lot from the Champions of Change as well. I've learned some new things in recent times at Crown, as you can imagine. One of the things that I did work very hard on at Lend-Lease was an initiative on closing the gender pay gap. It was a report done in 2017, and everyone in the Champions of Change then committed to undertaking a like-for-like pay gap analysis and getting an independent party to confirm that it was an adequate and appropriate measuring tool. And I mention that because I think the reporting side of the issue is really important, and I think it's everyone accepts, well, not everyone accepts, but most people accept that what you report and track, you perform better at, and I think that applies to sexual harassment, respect, every aspect of gender equality, because it's not just talking the talk, it's actually measuring progress. That's important, and if the data that you collect indicates that the employee experience doesn't match the corporate narrative, then obviously there's something wrong and more analysis is required. I joined Crown, as you mentioned, in June this year, been a bit of a baptism of fire. What I can say is that there are a lot of passionate people at Crown too, just like there were at Lend-Lease, and an organisation that is trying to rebuild the respect and trust the community needs to have in this organisation really does provide somewhat of a burning platform across a whole range of issues. And I see a cultural shift across the organisation providing a great opportunity to make sure that we actually embed everything we need to do around diversity and around respect and around sexual harassment and every other topic. When I joined in June, we had 11% female representation at the KMP level. I'm pleased to say that 5 months in, that's now 33%. I've made a couple of pretty good hires. So we're moving in the right direction, but there's a lot more to do. Crown did undertake a survey back in October last year on sexual harassment. It was conducted by an independent party, and it was focused on the gaming employees in Crown Melbourne. And what it showed was that there was still a significant gap to close in order to eliminate sexual harassment and to create a safe and respectful workplace in that environment. There was a view that even though we had, and we do have, sexual harassment policy, many organisations don't, we do have a specific sexual harassment policy, and we have targeted training for employees, but the commitment was seemed to be there from leaders, but employees remain very reluctant to report sexual harassment complaints. There was a view that first, they didn't trust the confidentiality of the process, and secondly, they didn't believe that anything would really change as a result of making the complaint. So that's obviously not a good environment. We've done a culture survey earlier this year. We've got some positive results from that survey despite the challenges at Crown, but again, some things remain a concern around reluctance to speak up and around a willingness to sort of work around policies and processes to suit whatever's required to get the job done. And I think that's something that we need to work hard on. We've established a leaders forum of the top 100 leaders, and we are making sure that they're well across all those survey responses and they have a sense of urgency around what needs to be done. We've recently changed our purpose and values as an organisation, and in fact the word respect is picked up now in our purpose statement. So I very much agree with the theme of the discussion, respect is everyone's business. So our revised purpose is together we create exceptional experiences with respect and care for our communities. And I think quite clearly an exceptional experience does require, in my view, that you feel like you're respected and cared for. And clearly that's not the case with sexual harassment and with the data that we're seeing. I'm also concerned that in the tourism industry, in the hospitality industry, and in gaming, the areas that we're involved in, psychological safety is quite hard to achieve when it comes to customer-facing roles. Hospitality staff are trained to provide great customer service, and in doing so, there is a line that customers should not be allowed to cross. But differentiating between customers who don't respect staff and customers who do requires a bit of courage. And I think what Debra said earlier is quite a strong point, that one person on their own is very difficult. Minimum of three. I think that bystander training and all the things that we need to do better is the only way to change that sort of environment. I agree with some of the comments that Kate has made, obviously, around the leadership needs to be not just, it's not just about individual leaders walking the talk. It's got to also be institutionalised, and it's also got to be supported by broad reporting. One of the questions I was asked to comment on was, why don't men, or do men, and if they don't, why don't men take a lead in this area? Obviously, I can't speak for all men, but what I can say is there's a range of perspectives and there's a range of issues. Some men that I talk to clearly understand the power imbalance. They clearly understand that that's the driving cause. Some are a bit naive and are not really aware of what people are experiencing in their workplace, and some are concerned about their own behaviour. So, they reflect on history and they reflect on the change of expectations and the higher levels of scrutiny that you are now subject to as a leader. And they wonder and worry about incidents where they've been less than appropriate in the past, and they worry about being accused of hypocrisy. They worry about the risk of putting their head above the parapet and becoming a target. And so I think all of those things are part of that mix around the challenges that men may feel stepping up. One of the things that I would say, and Sam, you mentioned it before, I've told people this story. When I was at the International Women's Day lunch, must have been the year before last now, I guess, given COVID, that Pip Marlowe hosted. And I think I was one of 4 men in a room of 44 people. And you did say very kindly that, you felt for me in that environment. So it was I remember now, it was actually the week that the whole issue around Christian Porter hit the media. So it was a pretty tough week. And so it wasn't quite welcome to my world. I think you said, suck it up, actually, were the words, Sam. And I think, and it really did resonate, actually. And I think again, one of the points that has come from the work that, and I'm now part of the Champions of Change again in my role at Lend-Lease, and some of the data that group has put together around the way that organisations can participate and how men can become more involved. There's some encouraging data. I think it was 77% of members have taken action to review reporting options to make sure there are multiple confidential avenues for employees who are impacted by sexual harassment to report. And about 56% have established regular reporting of data. That said, though, one of the things that came out, or a couple of things that came out, one is that there is an acceptance that many of those organisations have a zero tolerance approach, or at least a perceived zero tolerance approach, but they still don't have a sense, people still don't have a sense of the organisation will take care of them if they raise an issue. And the second one, and this goes to your point, Sam, about, welcome to my world, is an issue that was identified about not so much you must speak up, but where do you go to listen? So where do you go if you're a male who has not experienced sexual harassment, to have an immersion experience, to see it from a different lens? And I think that's quite an important thing for us to encourage men to be able to do, because you need to be able to see it from a different lens to be able to really understand the depth of the challenge.
Yeah.
So that was it for me, Sam.
Steve, you've been very efficient because you've asked the question that I was going to ask. So I'm grateful for you doing that about the men's particular experience. And I remember that event, and it was an acute day because everything was heightened at that point. We were all we were very articulate, I think, and very focused on what we were trying to do. And the 4 men in the room sort of felt that, but you were all interested and engaged. And I think we were all grateful on the day, just as we are today. And I'm hoping that the kit and the microsite is as interesting to men as it is to women, because it is a pathway to how you have those conversations, and it's not always easy. And I know you've done that a number of times. So thank you. And I hope it's the kind of kit that you can help us share around a lot of men, directors and leaders that assists them in that moment of how to step in. And the underlying thing, Kate knows this because it was in her report and her first report, Respect at Work, and it was in ANRO's, the Research Organisation on Women's Safety report. But today we've still got 4 out of 10 Australians who don't trust women's accusations of sexual assault. It's 40% of the population that still think that's exaggerated or didn't happen, despite it being extremely rare that a woman would fabricate anything, a sexual assault or harassment. So, culturally, it's important that men and women can have all those processes, and as you said, can have the conversation. So thank you, Steve, for being part of today. I'm going to jump straight to Marina. Marina, you've got so many personal experiences from the breadth of the things that you have done, and I know you've also got a view that it's not just women that are the recipients of sexual harassment, that it goes to people who are just different. And you've seen that in sport, and you've seen that in many other industries, in the media and elsewhere. So I know you're going to say a few words that take us in a number of directions, but because of your vast and the breadth of your experience, we're really looking forward to hearing your comments.
Thank you, Sam. I'd like to start by paying my respects to the traditional owners of the land in which we meet. In my case, it's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. Sam, as you said, I'm going to share with you some of my personal experiences, but I thought that I would start by saying, as you mentioned earlier, I have 30 years experience. Most of it was in the media industry. So 30 years ago, I was witnessing terrible examples of sexual harassment of young women in my workplace. And when I did mention it with horror to some of the leaders, they just kind of shrugged their shoulders and said, well, that's what happens here. 15 years ago, when I was actually in a leadership position, so I wasn't the CEO, but I was in a management position, I actually reported sexual harassment from my position as an executive. A young woman was sexually harassed, and a very senior man in the organisation sexually harassed her, and I reported that to HR, and I lost my job. So I know exactly how difficult this can be. It's the only time I've ever lost my job, but I would do it again because it was a very important moment. And I've also, more recently, so in the last 5 years, as a board director, I was the person that unfortunately somebody made a complaint directly to, because I was one of 2 women on a board, and a young woman in an organisation was being sexually harassed. And that's the example that I want to talk to about today, because I think I want to take you through what we did, and also some of the challenges that I think are real challenges that we have to acknowledge, and we have to think of how that might play out within our own organisations. So as I mentioned, I was, one of 2 women. A young woman felt, comfortable to report to me, but not to anybody else, and requested that I keep it confidential until she was comfortable and had legal advice and that sort of thing. And of course, it's a really challenging thing when, because, you know, as a board, we are one. We're not, you know, we don't behave as individuals. And so somebody reports something to me and it's about an organisation, then clearly I have to consider, you know, how I might share that. I had a conversation, so I didn't reveal the incident or, you know, the actual person that was being affected to my female colleague. And we were on a board it was a very male-dominated organisation. There were more men than women on the board. And we had a culture of mateship is really the thing that I'll say. And I know that Kate refers to this in her report and she has mentioned it. And I think it's one of the biggest challenges that actually we have within organisations of getting men to not only listen, but do something about it. So we had to be strategic about what we would do, because we knew that if it was proven that this was an issue, that this actually did happen, then we couldn't possibly be on a board or be part of an organisation that didn't do something about it. I certainly couldn't. And we wanted to make a difference. We didn't want to just kind of cut and run. We wanted to make a difference. And so what we did was we didn't have, 5 years ago, we didn't have a policy around sexual harassment. We did have a code of conduct, and we had an agreement around a set of cultures and values. And so we put that on the agenda. So in a board conversation, we discussed our values and we reconfirmed them. And we said, if something were to happen that made somebody feel unsafe in our organisation, would we be prepared to ensure, regardless of who they are, that we would do something about it? So we had zero tolerance for, poor behaviour. And they all agreed that would be the case. And I mentioned that there had been a sexual harassment complaint. Of course, I couldn't share the details. And we decided that what we would do was, my female colleague and I recommended that we would conduct an independent investigation. So we would actually do it at arm's length, so that we would find out. We would obviously come from a place that people are innocent unless proven guilty, but we would actually ask someone else to go and have a look at it. And this was 5 years ago. It doesn't feel like long ago, but it was early days with this sort of complaint. But we had to get the board to agree that if the complaint was upheld, that it did actually occur, that we would do something about it, because actually we'd agreed that we had zero tolerance to poor behaviour and people feeling unsafe in our workplace. That was critical, because when it came back and through this process, we were able to, the young woman agreed that in fact we could share it with the board. We obviously had to share with the board that the person who had sexually harassed a young woman was somebody who was a mate of a lot of the directors, was at a very senior position in the organisation, and a very powerful person actually in the industry. And there was fear. I could see, in fact, one of the men actually started crying. It was quite an extraordinary day, because he just couldn't be part of anything where we might actually have to remove this person because of their previous relationship and all that sort of thing. But because we'd had an agreement up front with them, they really couldn't do anything but agree to act on this. And so we removed that person. And that's important for a couple of things. So first of all, it confirmed that, what we were saying publicly and privately is actually what we believed in. But it was a really important message to the rest of the organisation when that person left, because it said that it doesn't matter who you are in our organisation, our values matter. So that was, as I said to you 5 years ago, it was a very, very difficult time, but it's one of the things I'm most proud of. I think the issue really is that if you're going to talk about zero tolerance for poor behaviour, what we're doing now is we're waiting for people to come forward. So we're saying, almost every one of my boards is saying now that, we've got zero tolerance towards sexual harassment. We're reporting against it. So we've talked about reporting against it. And, Steve referred to that with his organisations. One of the things that I've observed is that people who are most vulnerable. And so that still is the case, that in some organisations that's women. If there are culturally diverse people, they're more likely to be more vulnerable. People with disabilities, anyone with a difference. So, you know, in some organisations, it's your sexual orientation. They are still unlikely to report, even through a whistleblower avenue. And I know this because most of the organisations that I'm involved with have conducted surveys of our people. And even organisations that I feel have fantastic cultures and values, and I feel very positive and safe, I guess, you know, that as a board member, I can sleep at night knowing that the executive, you know, are onto this. Through the survey, we're still getting a couple of % of people who are saying that they were sexually harassed, and often because of their culture or their sexual orientation or their disability. And so our role, I guess, as directors is to ensure that we don't just sit and wait for people to come to us, but actually we're proactive, and we, you know, and it's a really difficult thing because, you know, how do you balance that in an organisation? How do you balance our responsibility for ensuring that we are proactively looking, you know, turning over rocks without going in there and turning over rocks? I mean, how do you do that? And I think that's one of the greatest challenges that I've observed in recent times on my board. So even the boards that report on sexual harassment. I think I've gone over my time, Sam, but I just thought that I would, yeah.
No, thank you, Marina. Thank you for sharing so deeply and importantly, what this feels like to be in those moments and to call the mateship. And, you know, so many interesting things have come through for me, just to even hear, Steve, you talking about the language of respect and care. But we know that, as Marina has said and as Debra's experienced, this issue of mateship and who gets privilege and how things are dealt with and people's fear of reporting, this is incredibly complex. And I know this is what drove Catherine Brenner's leadership with the committee to create a set of documents and worked experiences so that all of you can read through those and see yourself in them and understand that there are pathways and you can learn from others. And Marina, thank you for sharing that, because that is at the actual apex of where things get tough. Now, we've run a lot out of time because we've heard very deeply from each of our speakers. I'm really grateful, and I've just been very, very happy to do that, because otherwise we'd be racing and not getting that incredible insight. So what I'd like to do in the time we've got left is really go back very quickly to each of you, and I'll start with Kate. Kate, just listening to all of that, I guess, you know, reflections you might have, what it says about your work, what it says about why the way we do this and the tools we need is so important, and any other reflections you might have just in what you've heard from those three big examples of what's going on inside organisations for leaders.
They were all great examples, and I'm hugely grateful for for everyone to speak to the personal experience of doing this. I did want to say a couple of things. Firstly, I think that this is inspirational that Chief Executive have chosen this one quite strategic, high impact initiative. So what I would say is we often talk about the courage of Grace Tame and the courage of Brittany Higgins and the courage of Chanel Contos. I really want to see a bit more courage of leaders, courage of men. My job is really to say, you know, when Susan Kiefel, as the Chief Justice of the High Court, came out and said, this happened, we are ashamed that this happened in the High Court, that was courage. But it's not that hard for a leader who holds all the power. But the examples that you gave show that particularly it seems the way our male leadership works, it's not seeing the other side. I've never understood why a man would want to protect another man who has probably sexually harassed someone. Like, why are you lining up with them? But that happens. So I'd say the resource is really important. I'd also say the timing is perfect, and I'd encourage everyone to use it, because I've been that woman who's been told, why do you keep raising these issues? And I've said, any of you could raise these issues, but all you other men around the room are not. We're pushing on an open door. We've got a moment where boards are desperate. We've now got a resource. And what we're trying to do is deploy not just the women of Chief Executive Women, but all the men, anyone who can access this, to really start those conversations and get these boards to just leapfrog to good leadership from really what, you know, when I said I'm really concerned about the courage, so I'm looking for courage, but actually it's not asking that much for you. It's just really asking leadership.
What a fantastic summary, Kate. Thank you. And I think you've made the big call. At CW, we've been trying to work towards a position of supporting all those great young women who made this an issue, that took it, you know, to the battle lines really of what the country's dealt with. And yet, once they're done, it is up to us. It's us leaders of, you know, whether we're executives or on boards. We have enormous power, got enormous privilege in these roles, and it can be tough. And to your point about what happens with men, when I first joined the AFL Commission and raised a few of these things, one man followed me out and said, "We're really glad a woman has turned up, because as a group of men, no one of us could break rank to raise the issues you're raising. We couldn't do it culturally. We were just all stuck, even though we knew there was good and bad within us. We couldn't do it." And it wasn't just that it was a woman, it was just someone different. And as you get to that parity position, it becomes so much easier to not think of it down gender lines. It's just, you want the good people to step up. So thank you for making that so powerfully strong. We've got 5 minutes left. I'm just going to quickly go to each of Debra and Steve and then Marina, just for a quick reflection. Debra, you know, you've been one of those courageous people that Kate has described. You've put the case study up, you've spoken about it today. Anything you wanted to reflect on for people on the call about the use of the tool, or anything that struck you in the conversation of the others you wanted to reflect on?
Conscious of time, Sam, I think that certainly Steve's point around, and in fact other people made the point about mateship. This goes back to seeing each incident as somewhat special with special circumstances and so on. And look, we all know about information asymmetry. We all know that there are issues that might explain a certain report. Nothing explains sexual harassment, by the way, but if you create if you've got a mate who's got a problem, you can it's easier to come up with those exceptional circumstances that forgive them. You just have to put that aside. So that would, that goes back to my point about leaders having to raise themselves out of these issues. And look, at times of social change, some people are disadvantaged, but we have to take the higher road on this, I think. The other thing I'd say, much more minor point, and this was about reporting and people not wanting to report. One of the things we found in the work we did was setting up an informal channel. So we've got lots of channels in AMP, but there are a lot of people very nervous about starting a formal investigation, and they wanted a way to avoid that. So we've trained people, we've got volunteers now upskilled, and that has helped us a lot in terms of capturing some of these incidences.
Thanks so much, Debra. Steve, any reflections having heard all of the panel now from how you look at things, or anything you'll take away from today or share with the audience? And you're on mute.
Okay. Is it working now?
Yep.
Sorry, apologies. Yeah, look, I think the points about mateship are strong, and I think the two things that I heard really around the need, I hadn't really thought about this issue of you need at least 3 people there. It's an interesting thought. I must admit I hadn't turned my mind to that. It sort of seems to me it's a priority issue and it comes up for conversation if people put it on the table, but to listen to it that way, I think that's a very powerful statement, and making sure that people can break through it and not fall back in their traditional practices is important. The other thing I'd say is it's just, that there's a lot on here at Crown. The mere fact that I'm on this call, I think sends a signal to my team, and I think that's important too. You've got to make sure that you're prioritising this all the time. And board agendas do allow things like this to slip off because other priorities emerge, and that can't be allowed to happen. So reporting data is one good way of maintaining that on the agenda all the time.
Steve, thank you. I think at every event I go to that you speak at, you actually have a reflection that says you've learned something and you admit it, and you're not frightened by saying that. And, thank you. That's really important, because we often do that, but we don't often hear men doing it, and you just did it again. So really appreciate, and we do appreciate the fact you're sending a very strong signal in your early leadership at Crown to take this time today to spend with us. So really, really grateful for that. And Marina, we only have a minute or so left.
Yes.
Just a quick reflection, having now heard everyone with theirs, just to bring us to an end before I say thanks to you all.
Thanks, Sam. Look, I just really wanted to thank everybody for their input. I always learn something when I come to something like this, so thank you. I think it was just a reminder to everybody that, Kevin, is an example of a man who is taking this seriously. But I think we also need to acknowledge that there are men who are interested in this and who do want to do the right thing. But mostly, I don't think that we need to create a business case for it. I think ultimately this is our duty. We have to keep people safe in the workplace, and we have to remember that that is actually what we're trying to do here. So there is a really good reason for doing it. And I every time I hear a man step forward and say that they're going to take a leadership position, I think that's fantastic, because that's what needs to happen. But I think we should also acknowledge that maybe there are other men, if we help them step forward, so some need a bit of help, they will step forward. So I'll just leave you with that thought.
Thanks so much, Marina. We have run out of time, and I know I speak for all of you on this call in thanking our wonderful speakers. All four of you have been exceptional, and you gave us so much of yourself, but it was pithy, and we've kept the time. We could talk for hours about this, but actually the timing makes sure we get to the heart of what we needed to, and I think we did today. So thank you to you, Catherine, to you and your committee, and the team that supported you at Marlab. Bobby, I can see you on the call. It's an exceptionally beautiful site to go and look at, in that it works, and it's been built and designed to make sure that you engage with it and can learn from it. And we hope all of those tools, all of those case studies, all of the suggestions as just to how to have the conversation. There's very simple stuff in there about just how it feels to walk into a room to raise these issues, whether you're a man or a woman, and how do you bring people with you, everything you've heard from our panel. So Catherine, thank you. Thanks to the CW team for all the leadership and being able to pull off an event like this so magnificently. And I know I've just seen Barbara Kale and a number of our founders come to. I can't see all of you, but thank you for your leadership over 35 years that have got us to this point where we can utilise our collective wisdom and experience to do good things. Kate, I will come back to you because of what you're in the middle of at the moment. Thank you just for your determined clarion call for change and going to the highest workplaces in the country and actually making the point that that's where standards must be set. And the naming of your report, along with Respect at Work, we've said at CW, we think the positive duty that could be legislated that says that all workplaces have a positive duty to provide a safe workplace for all of us, but particularly against sexual harassment. We think that's an easy thing to say yes to, because that's what we've been doing with work health and safety generally, and why would this be any different? And so hopefully we're going to see great strides ahead, and that'll be because of all of you for joining and spreading the word. So thank you for joining today. I'll formally close the meeting. I hope you found this helpful, particularly in the heightened circumstance that we find ourselves with the look at Kate's work. And I hope you have a great afternoon. And thank you for the teams that have come together and are sitting in boardrooms and able to discuss this maybe a little bit longer. It's been great to see you take the opportunity to do that too. So thank you, everybody. And we'll see you at another CW event. And thank you to our panel once again.